Welcome back to another episode of That Fitness Couple, where we talk about why it is so important to lift heavy, especially as we age. And today we're talking about how training should or shouldn't change as we get older.
Let's go.
Now, this is a question we often get. I'm in my 50s. Should I be training differently? I'm in my 60s, my 70s, my 80s. And total shout out to two clients in their 90s that we have in our training studios that are still lifting heavy and training. And this also comes off the tails not only of those repeat questions, but also a video that Canada released on two people, elderly people, both in their 80s. And as one bent down to tie their basketball shoes to go out, the image quickly changed to another in the hospital bending over to put on their hospital slippers. And as one was reaching down to lift up their grandchild, it quickly panned to another that was lifting down to get their walker so that they could get out of their bed. And we see this all the time. We see young, fit people that are aged. I'm going to call them wise. And then we also see really, lacking, sick, frail people that are wise and aged. And so let's dive into how should training change as we get older, and why is it so important to train?
Generally speaking, training shouldn't change as we age. And I think if we're going to make that statement, then we also have to understand when we're talking about exercise, what are we speaking of? We're going to speak specifically from the standpoint of resistance training so that people understand, regardless of what age you are, I don't care if you're 8 or you're 80, resistance training should be at the core of your exercise program. So that part of it should not change. What also probably should not change is the intensity level. And I know that one's going to hit a lot of people. Wait a second, you mean you should push elderly people hard? And the short answer is yes. Of course, it's going to be with a caveat. As long as that person has the capability, then they should train hard. I think specifically back to my days training in Manhattan, I had a client at 78. He trained as hard as anyone I had ever trained before. And he wasn't a big guy, but he wasn't afraid of the hard work. And he would come back and report to me about the improvements that he was making in his conditioning and how he felt like he was regaining muscle and regaining strength. And it was all because we weren't afraid to work hard. Now, if somebody's starting their training at that age, you're going to take certain things into consideration. And like anybody, maybe even if you were meeting them at their younger selves, you're going to meet them where they're at. So wherever somebody's at, that's where you meet them and you provide the appropriate level of work and intensity. But if somebody, let's just say like yourself, right? You are soon to be 40. Someday you're going to be 65. Your training should not be any different then than it is now. And I would even say you should be working towards, just like I am right now, is nearing 50, right? I'm working to maintain the same weight loads and the same intensity level that I had 10 years ago, because that's going to be the key factor in whether or not you keep the results that you've gained up to this point.
Absolutely. And I think the greatest question then is why? And there's two whys. First, there's something called sarcopenia, and then there's something called osteopenia. And both are true for every single person. So we begin to lose muscle after age 40.
Statistically, what we're told is that after the age of 30, if we're not resistance training, so if we're doing nothing, we can lose anywhere from 3 to 8% of our muscle mass within each decade. Okay. So you can call it an average of 5% loss in muscle every single decade.
Well, and this is why a lot of women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s will say, my weight hasn't changed, but my clothes fit differently. And it's the slow loss of muscle if they're doing nothing to prevent the loss. fat creeps up a little bit. So again, the scale is not changing, but they're like, why are my clothes tight? My mom has said that in the past before she was a religious pure physique lifer. Let's also talk then about osteopenia. So osteopenia is bone loss, right? Osteopenia turns into osteoporosis. So doctors, once we hit middle age, they begin assessing our bone density. And we have seen time after time, countless clients reverse osteoporosis through resistance training.
Plays the biggest role in somebody being able to increase or maintain their bone mineral density. It is directly tied to the amount of force that is placed on our skeletal system. And we know that the safest way to increase our bone mineral density is through resistance training, particularly, again, with the approach that we would take, which is slower motion, low impact, where the focus is on reducing momentum, which is going to reduce the impact forces on your joints, because there is a fine line here too. If you know that putting force on your skeletal system is what's going to help increase bone mineral density, well, there's a lot of ways that you could approach that. You could do ballistic type of plyometrics where you're jumping and landing, and that will increase your bone mineral density. However, it comes with a greater risk of creating some type of joint issues or exacerbating one that's already there, which for most of us, once we do cross over 30, 35, we then begin to feel the effects of maybe some of the things that we were doing in our younger years. That said, as a person is aging, they still need to find a way to put that force on their skeletal system, and doing resistance training is going to be the safest and most effective way.
Well, I think about both sets of our parents. Your parents do our online program. My parents, just for proximity, do our in studio program. And all parents are in their 70s.
Yep. And in good shape.
And they totally crush it.
Absolutely. And what's great about this conversation too is because I think about my parents who started the program later. It took them a little later to adopt it, and some of that too is again because of the proximity and what we had available and what have you. But now, after doing the online program consistently for about 2 years, it's made major differences in both their body compositions.
Yeah.
And I think that that's encouragement for those who are wondering, like, as I get older, can I make any changes in the first place? And the short answer is yes. You can make changes in your body at any age. Of course, the younger you are, the easier it is and the more of a head start you give yourself. But as long as one is training properly and with an appropriate amount of intensity at older ages, there's no reason why you can't build strength where you lost it, build muscle where you had lost it, improve your bone density where you had lost it. So all these things are available, including improvements in their cardiorespiratory fitness. I mean, this is also a reason why, as we get older, we shouldn't be shying away from training hard. The objective should be to train as hard as we possibly can. And it's only when we are pushing those limitations that we're going to see these types of improvements, or in the case of those who may just be in those maintenance stages, you're going to maintain what you've built, because it truly is the use it or lose it syndrome, where the moment we stop focusing on trying to maintain our strength. I'll give the example of if a client comes into the studio and let's say they've been with us for 10 years, right? We have many clients who fall into that category. So when they first came in, they were using X amount of pounds on the leg press machine. Well, today, 10 years later, we don't say, oh, you're 10 years older, so maybe we should scale that weight back. No, we're trying to make sure that wherever your peak has been in terms of that weight stack. So let's say you went from being able to lift 225 pounds on day one, and then you finally hit a max of 350. Just because you're 10 years into this doesn't mean we're going to say, well, now that you already hit 350, so let's scale it back down to 275. Why would we do that? We would never want to do that, because we want them to continue to maintain that level of strength regardless of what age they are. And that's what we're all striving for. And just to go back to the cardiorespiratory piece of this too, because I think it's an important factor. A lot of people, especially if they're coming to us in elder years, or you're listening or watching and you're like, hey, I'm considering doing this. What should I be doing? Your focus, as we've always said, should be on resistance training first, because it's the only form of exercise that improves all areas of your fitness, not just strength and muscle and bone density, but even your aerobic conditioning and your cardiovascular capacity and your cardiovascular health. All of that is tied really closely to resistance training.
And has impacts on brain health. And there was a new study that just came out that stated resistance training can have positive impacts on patients with dementia. So your body is a system, right? Every part of it is tied together. And when you talked about how important it is to apply force, think about when astronauts go out into the outer atmosphere and there's no gravity. What happens? They're losing muscle, right? They're getting frail. They come back and these people look completely different. I mean, there was the most recent astronauts that were, apparently stranded for this extended period of time. I mean, they were weak getting out of the space capsule. And it's because there's no force that's being applied. With the absence of gravity, your body is deteriorating. And I think the same can be true for those of us here on Earth. If you're not applying force, naturally, your body is going to deteriorate. You actually have to work to keep it in shape. And I just want to point back also to our parents. Some people will say, well, okay, so fine, Mike's parents started like in their 60s, 70s, like that's impressive, but I have all these injuries. My mom has a total knee replacement. My dad has had rotator cuff surgery, but I have all these injuries. My mom has a total knee replacement. My dad has had rotator cuff surgery. They still train at an intense level. And of course, modifications are made where maybe my dad's range of motion is limited when he has to do shoulder activities. We make that adjustment for him, but they're there training just as hard as everybody else in the class. And it's inspiring for us to see that. It's inspiring for them to be a part of it. And so there really should be no reason why, injury, surgeries included, you're not at least doing some form of resistance training regardless of your age.
And that's why we said in the beginning, generally speaking, nothing should change as you get older. Specifically speaking, of course, there's going to have to be modifications if you are at an age where that injury you had in your 30s is really now starting to become problematic. Because at the end of the day, when we're doing exercise, we are still, even if we're doing it low volume, proper intensity, slow motion, we're doing all the right things, we're still going to have some degree of wear and tear. Plus, again, we're not going to stop living our lives, so we'll be doing activities that maybe are still stressing us in a negative way. So you can make adjustments. I think what many people should be thinking about, however, is if there are changes to be made, what would those changes be? And I think this is where I'm going to step outside of pure physique and just talk more in general about the fitness community or people who exercise. If you're getting older and your exercise up to this point has consisted more of the light training, the more endurance or aerobic type exercise, then now is the time to transition to resistance training. And don't worry about getting the cardiovascular benefit. You're still going to get that because of certain mechanisms that are in place. I could get super sciencey about that. Maybe I will in a moment. But
I think you should. We've actually gotten some feedback, and people really do appreciate when you go there. They also appreciate the analogies and teaching that come from this side. So I'll hone in on whatever you're going to say next.
All right. What happens is when we're resistance training, and this is where people can't wrap their heads around, how can you guys just do resistance training? What about cardio? What about my heart health? You get all those benefits from the resistance training. And the reason why has to do with something that's called the Frank-Starling law. And what this law says is that when your muscles contract, so when they're contracting hard, think about the last few repetitions of a leg press, right? You know how that feels. Your heart is pounding,
shaking,
your muscles are shaking, and you can't wait for it to be over. But what happens is that when our muscles are contracting intensely, there's this venous blood flow return to the heart. So your muscles contract, right? The veins constrict, and then it pushes deoxygenated blood back to your heart. What happens in that instance is now the heart stretches a little bit, expands. This is, again, that Frank Starling law. So it expands, but then it causes it to contract even harder. And so now you're increasing the efficiency of your heart. This happens through intense contractions. It doesn't happen because you run. It doesn't happen because you bike. It happens because when you run or you bike or you resistance train, your muscles contract as you do that activity. The difference between resistance training and those other lower intensity exercises is that in resistance training, you're getting the benefit with a smaller amount of work because it's more intense work. When you get that benefit from doing any type of aerobic or endurance exercise, you're getting smaller muscle contractions, less intense ones, but you're still getting that venous flow back to your heart. So basically what happens is when we've researched this, what we've found is that a person can either do longer endurance, lower intensity exercise and get these cardiovascular benefits, or they can do short duration, high intensity exercise and get the same benefits. The difference is that with the short duration, you're talking about 9 minutes worth of intense exercise to get the same aerobic benefit that you would get from 3 hours of aerobic exercise each week. So if I'm aging and I am worried about wear and tear on my body and such, I am going to emphasize the resistance training and minimize the amount of high impact, lower intensity exercise, knowing that I'm going to get the same benefit over here that I would get over here in terms of how it's going to affect my cardiorespiratory system. So it's not the exercise per se, it's the mechanism. That's what I hope people start to get where they're hearing these conversations, is that your heart health is not related to a specific type of exercise. It's related to certain mechanisms. And there are lots of different ways to trigger that mechanism. And so high intensity resistance training is the most efficient way to trigger the same exact mechanism that's going to make you aerobically fit over here, but you're going to do it in a different way over here.
I have no analogy for you. I think that was very well explained. All I could think of, honestly, is like that force like that we want to apply to our body, again, which is only making us stronger. It's kind of like coal under pressure. You're just producing diamonds. And I think about this shorter amount of exercise, resistance training, still producing a diamond, right? It's like that's, if we were looking at this in terms of currency, that would make the most sense and bang for my buck.
Absolutely. And the beautiful part is that as we're getting older, we don't have to change the volume of what we're doing, meaning you can keep up with this type of exercise program longer into your life versus some of the others. So if we are to draw comparisons, we've seen the people who they're runners. They love to run. But as they're getting older, you see the struggle. You see the breakdown in their body. And most runners are not going to retire because they feel like they're just done with running. They're going to be forced to retire from running. Usually it's an injury. It's something that their body just simply cannot handle the forces anymore. And that's why they stop running. But people of that mentality will run until they're dead, but they get to the point where their body physically can't keep up.
Yeah.
Whereas doing resistance training and doing it intelligently, you can do that not only long into age, but watch your body continually either improve or at the very least maintain the condition that it had been in, whether it's 5 years earlier or 10 or 20. It's something that makes this very unique compared to other forms of exercise.
I love it. Let's also talk then about improved mitochondrial function.
So this goes back to that same exact conversation in terms of when we're doing this resistance training, we don't think of it as cardiovascular conditioning, but you are expanding the capillaries in your muscles, you're increasing mitochondria. And so your body is better able to use the resources that are available. in terms of that Frank Starling law, what's happening is like you're improving the stroke volume of your heart. So now it's not just that you're improving your heart health, because you're improving the efficiencies. Now your heart doesn't have to work as hard. We've given the analogy 1,000 times. If you haven't heard it, you can hear it right now. And if you've heard it 1,000 times from us, you're still going to hear it again. But I always love giving the example of us being New Yorkers. If we had a visitor come and we brought him to the city, brought him to the Empire State Building and said, hey, walk to the top of the stairs. How is that person going to feel when they get to the top of the Empire State Building?
Is this where I say winded and exhausted?
That's exactly where you come in. And then if we take that person and we bring them back down to the bottom, now they're fully recovered, and I'm Mike, the magical muscle fairy, and I bless them with hips and thighs that are 60% stronger than they just were moments ago. Send them back up the stairs. How might they feel when they reach the top?
Much easier.
Right? They're not going to be as winded. Their heart's not going to be pounding as hard because their muscles are better able to handle the work. And remember, all of the conversation around aerobic conditioning, around cardiovascular conditioning, it all revolves around muscle. So if you have stronger muscles, then your heart doesn't have to work as hard. But if you work your muscles hard, you're going to also make your heart stronger. And now these two things are working like a flywheel. Whereas as your cardiovascular conditioning improves, guess what you could do in the gym? Probably work a little bit harder, push more intensely. And as you're working more intensely, what is it doing? It's, again, helping you to improve the stroke volume of your heart. So these two things just continue to build on each other, which puts us in a really beautiful place at the end of the day.
You know what my dad was recently told by a cardiologist, that he had the heart of a 40-something-year-old. And that's
amazing.
Pretty cool, right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot has to do with, again, pushing yourself. So how does training change as we get older?
It really doesn't, nor should it. Unless you're not training this way now, the way that we're describing, that would be the only way that it should change. But by and large, if you're training hard, you're training consistently, then keep doing what you're doing.
Let's go.